When first approaching business as a ministry, as a paradigm for business, we come at it from all different angles, and the reality is it's a journey. For some, it's this shock of, whoa, can you even do this? To others, it's, well, how would you do that? Some get excited going, I've always wanted to, I just didn't know how. Others going, oh, I thought I was doing it, I just never thought about it this way. And no matter where you began your journey, it is a journey. And we know that Jesus calls us to be wise and discerning as disciples. We're also called to be bold, to be faithful, to be fearless. But fearlessness and faithfulness does not mean recklessness or ignorance. So we're called to this tension. And as managers of God's businesses, it is healthy to periodically step back and do an honest assessment of how are we managing the tension of faithful stewardship in business. I'd like us to think about a 2x2, looking at two critical dimensions to how we live that out. The first would be thinking practically about the protocols. Protocols. What do you mean by protocols? The HR legal things. This is policies, protocols, guidance, best practices. This is the fundamentals what we got to put in place to steward a business using the liberties we have in business. And the absence of this can be reckless. It can jeopardize and imperil the very businesses we lead. It can jeopardize the legacies we're leading. And it can create the risk of harm to others in the faith work movement if we are negligent in these matters. So we can think about an assessment that will look at the different best practices we know, and we can begin to go through a checklist of fundamentals and say, are we doing these things? Have we looked at these things? And begin to realize how well we're doing in that. But then there's the vertical, where we really want to talk about the practices. So in C12, we ask the question, how does Jesus show in your business? You could double click on that and say, okay, if Christ is in you, how is that changing the what and the why and the how you're doing business? And how is that manifest across the entirety of a 5-point alignment matrix? Is it actually changing things? We know that life is worship and mission and stewardship. Is that playing out in our leadership in the business? And so you can begin to go through a checklist assessment of the different things that could look like, from an integration all the way up to robust ministry expression, and how is Jesus reflected in this business? Well, as we begin to go through that assessment, 4 quadrants emerge. If you're new to this area, maybe you've not implemented any of the practices yet, still kind of getting your arms around it, but you've also not implemented any of the protocols to make it wise and prudent yet. Well, if you're not implementing anything, you haven't done anything, well, you've got pretty low impact, but you've also got low risk. The reality is, we call that it's kind of a secular position. You're new to this, nothing's really happening yet. But maybe you jumped in and you're doing all sorts of great things. You're integrating your faith in the business. The 5-point alignment matrix is flourishing. There's ministry happening in your business. And so you're scoring way up here. But you've been kind of negligent and dismissive of some of the protocol pieces, the HR legal things that just need to be done in a good business as a ministry. And so you're still over here. Well, that's going to put an interesting situation, because sure, you've got high impact. That's awesome. But you've also introduced high risk. And that puts you in a reckless zone. Something's going to one day happen to you or this business, or it's going to affect others in the movement, and that needs to be addressed. Now, perhaps you've been so mindful of the HR legal stuff that you are off the charts on documentation and process. So we got that done. You just not really implemented anything. Well, you're in a spot where you're going to have low impact and low risk. But it's kind of like, what's the point? This is almost a superficial deal where it's Christian in name only, because we're not actually doing anything different with the gospel. Now, of course, like any classic 2x2, where we want to be is the top right box, right? We are maximizing fidelity and stewardship of the business that God has entrusted us with, and we are maximizing the liberties and the best practices we know are out there. And this is going to put us in a zone of high impact and high security. This is the zone of faithfulness. This is flourishing. This is where we want to be. And so with any assessment, we need to stop and let this give us feedback. We live in an era where there is tremendous liberty to live out our faith and our identity in Christ in business. The question is, are we using it? If the tide waters of liberty was to recede and we found ourselves losing those liberties, the question is, would that receding tide reveal rocks of courageous faithfulness that we've been living it, or would it be a non-event? And you and I share so much in common. We've got an identity, a destiny, a commissioning, and a calling in Christ. We are ambassadors and disciples of Jesus. The question is whether or not that is reflected authentically in our leadership in business. Are we allowing our vocation and context to define our identity, or is our identity blessing and transforming our vocation and context we find ourselves in? So we do this assessment. We ask these questions. We go, where are you at? What's the gap? Where do we want to be? And what am I going to do with this?